Um, Hi everyone. So today we have the special review session, and today we'll review all the content from the entire course, perhaps with the exception of week 12 because we have the class for week 12 tomorrow. So you have any questions from the entire syllabus, you can ask me, and I'll also solve the remaining questions from week 11, which we could not complete in the previous class. And there are some extra questions which I have compiled from the whole syllabus. So I'll be discussing those as well. So I think we'll wait a few minutes for everybody to join, and then we'll start. Okay, so I'll start with where we left things in the previous class in week 11. So from the week 11 question 7, we already solved the first part of the question, which was question 6. We were given a production function in terms of two inputs, Z1 and Z2, where the production function is given as f of Z1 and Z2 equal to under root of Z1 plus Z2. You were asked to find the supply function, and you were given the information that the input price for Z1 is greater than input price for Z2. And you were given also that the price for the final good, which we can call as Q, is numeraire. Numeraire means that you are taking the price for that particular good as 1, and you are writing all other prices in terms as a as a sort of like a ratio of that particular price. So a numeraire good is a good for which we normalize the price as 1, and we express all other prices as a ratio, or as a, you can say, a multiple of the price of that particular good. So for example, if the price of that good is 2 rupees and we take it as numeraire, and the price of other goods is say 8 rupees, 10 rupees, something like that. So if we have to write the pricing in numeraire terms, then the pricing of that particular good is 1, and other goods will be 8 divided by 2 equal to 4, 10 divided by 2 equal to 5, so on and so forth. That's what numeraire means, in case you didn't know. So we found this function for the supply. Let's go back to that. So let me go back to week 11. Let's see what we found. So this is what we found in the previous class. We found the supply function by using the simple logic. All we did was we applied the case for perfect substitutes, because Z1 and Z2 appear in separable and additive format. Separable means Z1 and Z2 are not multiplied, and they're not in any other, they're not related in any other way. They can be separated, and they're additive means they're like added, like Z1 plus Z2. And then there is an under root sign, which is okay, but basically if it appears at Z1 plus Z2, X1 plus X2 or something, it's always a case of perfect substitutes. So with the information we were given, if the price of W2 is less than, if W2 is less than W1, then the firm is only going to use Z2, it's not going to use Z1 at all. And so our cost function simply reduces to W2 Z2, and from there we can also simplify the expression of Q. Q is equal to under root Z1 plus Z2. Now Z1 becomes 0, so Q just becomes equal to under root Z2. And then all we do is we just replace the value of Z2 in the cost function, and we calculate the marginal cost, average variable cost, and so on and so forth, to check for when the firm will be operative. And the supply function is nothing but marginal cost equal to P. So we have the marginal cost function, we equate that as equal to P. We rearrange the terms and we get Q in terms of P, or in this case P is 1. So Q is just expressed as 1 upon 2 W2. Okay, this is where we left things in the previous class. Now let's start with today's question. So today's question is question 7. Let me write this down. Okay, so I'll just rewrite the cost function which we got. Sorry, not cost function, supply function which we got. Qs is equal to 1 upon 2 W2. This is the cost function we got. Now the question is asking you the profit function for this firm. So what is the profit function? Let's call this as pi. So pi is nothing but total revenue minus total cost, right? This is like pretty straightforward. So in in this case, all we will do is we will write total revenue, and let's also once check what we got the total cost function as. I'm just rewriting the cost function also here, which we obtained earlier in the previous class. This was W2 Q square. Okay, from W2 Z2 we just replaced Z2 as Q square. The original, let me write the original function also. Production function was F is equal to under root Z1 plus Z2. Okay, this was the original function. So now this is pretty simple. Total revenue is nothing but P into Q, and cost function is given to us W2 Q square, right? And now we will do the opposite thing, whatever we did before, or actually we could have just written the total cost function in terms of W2 also, but anyway, that we'll just come to that, right? So this is PQ minus W2Q squared, and we just found the supply function here, right? This is what we just found the supply function to be, which means we can substitute Q in terms of W2 here, okay? So this is nothing but W2 into 1 upon 2 W2 whole square, and P we can mention as we have taken as 1, so we can just remove P from here. It just becomes Q, and here also instead of Q we can just write it as 1 upon 2 W2, right? I'm just shortening the length of the thing because otherwise it's just going to become too long. So this is nothing but 1 upon 2 W2 minus W2 into 1 upon 4 W2 square. So this W2 cancels with this. This is 1 upon 2 W2 minus 1 by 4 W2, which means profit function is nothing but 1 by 4 W2. This is the final answer. This is the what do you call it? Profit function. Okay, this is pretty much it in this question. Let's go to the other questions we had. So this answer is going to be the first option, A option. Pi is equal to 1 upon 4 W2. Okay. They've asked you this in the functional form, but it can also be like they give you the value of W2 and W1, and then you calculate these things, right? This is just a little more algebraic instead of just plugging in numbers and calculating things. Okay, then next question is again about a cost function, and you're given the market price, and you're just asked whether the firm will operate or shut down. So in this, again, you will do the same thing which we did last time, where we will check the the functional form of average variable cost function and the marginal cost function, and we will check for what values of P average variable cost is covered for the firm, right? So like what I did, I factorized the term, its quadratic function, I factorized it, and I checked at what value average variable cost is the lowest, and you draw the parabolic curve, and in the upper part of the curve, that is where the firm is going to operate. So all you have to check is where the market price P250 lies in that entire curve. Okay, I'm not solving this now, and this is a question from Perloff, so you can probably find the answer for this also. If you've tried this, if you have a problem, you can tell me. But if you don't have a problem, then I'll jump to the next question. This is a slightly different question. So this slide is not updated. Yeah. So there are 10 firms in a certain market, and it says that each of the 10 firms in a competitive market has a cost function of C equal to 25 plus Q squared. Okay, the market demand function is given as Q equal to 120 minus P. So you're given the cost function of each firm. Each firm has the same cost function, and the market demand function is Q equal to 120 minus P. Okay, you have to be a bit careful that you're given the cost function for individual firms, and the demand function given is the market demand. Okay, generally market demand is denoted by capital Q, and the firm demand is denoted by small q, demand or supply, either way. Okay. Now you're asked to determine the equilibrium price quantity per firm and market quantity. Okay. You're also asked to find the firm's profit function and what is each firm's profit at equilibrium price. Okay, you're asked a whole lot of things. First, let's discuss what we are going to actually do in this question. You're given the cost function of each firm, right? You're given the market demand function. What we need to find is, to know the market equilibrium price, we need the market supply function, right? Market supply function is going to be nothing but the summation of each firm's supply. So if each firm supplies small qs, then capital Qs becomes 10 times small qs, because we are told that this is a competitive market, and in perfect competition we assume that each firm is exactly identical in your setup, basically. And we're also given that the cost function of each firm is exactly the same. So which means that we can just directly sum the supply of each firm. If the supply for one firm is small q sub s, subscript s, then the supply for the entire market is going to be 10 times small qs, because you're just summing the supply for 10 firms, right? So if we know capital Qs, we can equate that to the market demand function, capital Q equal to 120 minus P, and we can just solve the equation to get the equilibrium price. Okay. Now, how do we get the market supply function? First, we have to get the individual firm supply function, right? And how do we get the individual firm supply function? We've just solved several questions on that last week, and even the previous question which I just explained, I didn't solve it, but I explained how we arrive at the supply function. What will we do? We will check for what prices the average variable cost is, in the upper part. We see what is the minima for the average variable cost curve, let's put it that way. And beyond that minima, we calculate the marginal cost curve, and that is the supply function. Let me draw it actually. Okay, so in our case, actually, the cost function is quadratic, so we will not get a parabola. Let me open the question. So our cost function is given to us as 25 plus q squared, right? So variable cost is what? It's just q squared. Marginal cost is 2q, average variable cost is q. Okay, so in our case, we will not have that whole problem of figuring out the parabola and all that, because both of these are just straight lines. Okay, and this you can put as cost or marginal cost or whatever. So let me draw the average variable cost and the cost curves. So this is your average variable cost and this is your marginal cost. Which means that for P greater than 0, the firm will operate. Firms will operate, right? Now, what is the market supply curve? We get firm's supply curve. Actually, a very easy question. You just have to apply the concepts. Is given by marginal cost equal to P, right? What is marginal cost? 2Q. So P is equal to 2Q. That is your marginal cost or supply curve. Or you can say small q is equal to P by 2, small qs. Now market supply, capital Qs is equal to 10 times small qs, because there are 10 firms, right? Therefore Qs is equal to 10 into P by 2 is equal to 5P. Okay, you can number this, say, suppose as equation 2. We were given the market demand function. This is given to us as Q is equal to, or let's say QD equal to 120 minus P. Now in equilibrium, QS equal to QD. That's what equilibrium means, right? So we just equate QS and QD. What do we get? 5P equal to 120 minus P. 6P equal to 120. P is equal to 20, right? 12 by 6, 20. So the equilibrium price comes out to be 20. Let me just check if I have made any mistake.
Madam, we go back a couple of steps to see how we arrived at QS equal to 10 into P by 2.
How will you arrive at QS? What is QS? Capital QS.
Market supply.
Yes. So what will market supply be?
Total number of firms into supply for one firm.
Yes. And what is the supply for one firm?
Supply for one firm. Okay, that condition I was not sure.
So this is where we have calculate the supply for one firm. QS is equal to P by 2. Right?
Okay, madam.
That's why we took the marginal cost curve and we derived the individual firm's supply function. So therefore market supply is nothing but 10 times small QS, that is P by 2. That is 5P. So QS is equal to 5P is the market supply function. So you equate QS equal to QD, you get P is equal to 20. Now let me see what else the question is asking. Quantity per firm and market quantity. So now we know P. So QS is equal to 5P, right? QS is equal to 5P is equal to 5 into 20 is equal to 100, right? Small QS is equal to QS by 10 is equal to 100 by 10 is equal to 10. Okay, and then they are asking what is the firm's profit function? What is each firm's profit at equilibrium price? Now the firm's profit function is nothing but, let's write this profit function. Okay, so for profit function is nothing but total revenue minus total cost, nothing complicated, right? Total revenue is nothing but P into Q. We're talking about each firm, okay? So let me rewrite this actually. Pi PW. So each firm will have an identical profit function. I'll just read it in what I wrote. That's all. This is P into Q minus, we are given the cost function already. What was that? 25 plus Q squared, right? 25 plus Q squared. Now we have P and we have Q. Right now we want to find, what do we want to find? We want to find the profit function in terms of prices. That's what profit function is. Profit function means profit in terms of prices. Prices meaning input and output prices. In this case, we don't need W. We are not given W and we don't need W, but P we are given. So what do we need to do? We need to convert all the Q, wherever you have Q, we have to write that in terms of P. P comma W, or you can just write it as P because we are not given W. and we don't need it also. So Q we already calculated here, right? P by 2. It's already highlighted. Q is equal to P by 2. So let's write this, P into P by 2 minus 25 plus, again this is P by 2 square, close bracket. So this is P square by 2 minus 25 minus P square by 4. And just open the brackets and simplify the term. Now you just simplify this further, P square by 4 minus 25. Okay, this is the profit function. And in equilibrium, we know that price is 20. Therefore, pi 20 is what? 20 whole square by 4 minus 25. 400 by 4 minus 25 equal to 75. This is each firm's profit in equilibrium. They're making 75 bucks of profit. Okay, so remember, when you're asked the profit function, you need to express it in terms of all the exogenous parameters, which is the prices of output and the prices of inputs. In this case, you were just directly given the cost function here. You were directly given the cost function 25 plus Q squared. So we did not need prices of inputs per se, right? Because instead of calculating the cost function, you are just directly given the cost function in terms of Q, right? But if you are given input prices, the profit function will be in terms of P and W. In this case, it will just be in terms of P. And we can very easily simplify that because we already know the supply function of each firm. From there, we can get the value of Q in terms of P, which is Q is equal to P by 2. And we just simplify that and do a little algebra. And this is your answer. Okay, this is the firm's profit function. Okay, so this is this question, and I think this was it. So question 8, if you have still not solved it, please do try it. I want you to attempt at least one question of this type on your own, because I already solved 2 questions of this type. And if you get stuck in this question, then I will prefer to answer your doubts rather than just solve it again. Okay, so let's take a pause here, 1 minute. Okay, so now I will go to the review class, the review session slides, and I will take some questions from like the entire syllabus, like beginning of the syllabus till till now, and we will just recap some of the concepts we have studied till now. Just give me a moment. Let me open this. Okay. Okay, so these are questions which are taken from all the different chapters. So the first question is telling you that the demand for tomatoes amongst urban buyers is given as Q1 equal to 100 minus P, and the demand amongst rural buyers is Q2 equal to 60 minus 2P. You're asked, what is the market demand function for tomatoes? And you're also asked to illustrate it on a diagram. So this is a very simple question. If you remember, we solved questions like these, I think, in week 1. So it's a simple question. I want you to try it at least on your own. Just see if you remember the concept, and then I will solve it. So I'm just muting myself for a few minutes. I want you to try it, and then I'll solve it.
Madam, there is also another related problem in assignment which I wanted to bring it up right now.
Yes, which question is that?
In assignment 1, I think it's question number 8.
Okay, 1 minute, let me open it. Question number 8 is asking at any price the market demand curve is what? At most as steep as the steepest individual demand curves, at least as flat as the flattest individual demand curve, is the sum of all the individual demand curves. All of the above. Is that the question you're asking?
Yes, madam, that's the question. And I have a problem over there with what they gave us the answer.
Okay, I will discuss this conceptually also. If you solve this question, I think partly it might be clearer. But okay, I will answer it. Just try this question first, then I will answer both the questions.
Okay, madam.
Okay, so did you attempt this? So what are
Yes,
we
madam.
going to do? Yeah, so let's solve this question now. So the question is saying that there are two types of where is the question? Yeah, there are two types of buyers, urban and rural. For urban buyers, Q1 is equal to 100 minus P is the demand curve, and for rural, Q2 is equal to 60 minus 2P is the demand curve. And you're asked the entire market demand, meaning horizontal summation of urban and rural buyers. So the first thing, if you remember, what we want to find out is at what point, or rather at what price, the quantity Q1 and Q2 is going to be greater than or equal to 0. Right? Only horizontal summation means we are taking a sum of the values horizontally on a demand curve. I will draw it also, but let me first solve this part. So for Q1 to be greater than equal to 0 implies 100 minus P is greater than equal to 0 implies P is less than or equal to 100. Okay. Now for Q2 to be greater than equal to 0 implies 60 minus 2P is greater than equal to 0 implies 2P is less than or equal to 60, P is less than or equal to 30. So there are two slabs or two values at which the demand curve will change. If price is less than 30, then both rural and urban buyers will buy the tomatoes. If price is between 30 and 100, then only the urban buyers will buy it. And if price is more than 100, then nobody will buy the tomatoes, right? Intuitively, that is what it means. So you can say Q is equal to Q1 plus Q2 for price less than or equal to 30 or less than 30, let's say, for is equal to Q1 for um, price less than 100 greater than or equal to 30, and 0 for price greater than or equal to 100. Okay, this is what it means. Now let's simplify what this means, which is basically Q1 plus Q2 is equal to what? 100 minus P plus 60 minus 2P is 160 minus 3P for P less than 30. And Q1 is 100 minus P, so this is 100 minus P for P less than 100 greater than equal to 30, and 0 for P greater than equal to 100. So this is how we will write the demand function. Okay, so is this part clear? Did you get this right?
Yes, madam.
Okay, good. So now let's move to the deeper question you were asking me about the nature of the demand curve. Now let's draw this diagram also, because this is also part of the question and this will also sort of help you understand. Okay, so first of all, let's draw both these functions. At p equal to 0, q1 is what? 100. This is 100. And let me draw this with this diagram. And at p is equal to 100, q is equal to 0. So let's say this is 100. And this is 100. So let's draw this. Then the other diagram would be at p is equal to 30, q is equal to 0. 30 is somewhere here, right? And at Q is equal to 0 at P equal to 30, and at P is equal to 0, Q is 60. This somewhere here is 60. So something like this. It's not perfect, but yeah. Okay, so this is your Q2 and this is Q1. I'll just say D2 and D1. Okay, this is the urban and the rural. I've called it as D1 and D2 because they are the demand curves. Now let's draw the market demand function. This is what 160 minus 3p. Give me a moment. 16. Okay. Yeah, I don't have the solution for it. I just wanted to check that it's correct. Okay, it's not a very complicated question. So at P equal to 160 by 3, let's do this in the rough work. At P is equal to 160 by 3 is equal to, say, 53.33. Q is equal to 0, right? This is just something I'm calculating separately for the first part, 160 minus 3p in the price range of P is less than 30. So yeah, of course, we are just doing this as a check. Now P is equal to 160 by 3 comes out to be 53.33, which is never going to happen because we're anyways taking P is less than 30. Okay, so this is like confirmation that this function is not becoming 0 for P less than 30. So let's draw this P, but I'm just taking this as the average approximate value. It's not going to reach that value, but let's say this is something here. Q is equal to 0 at P equal to 53.3, and at P is equal to 0, Q is 160, right? So somewhere here. Okay. Now we know that this thing is valid only till oops. I'll just explain 1 minute. Let me just draw it first. Okay. It's not a perfectly straight line, but you get the picture. So now what we're trying to do is something like this up till P equal to 30. After P equal to 30, from 30 to 100, it is this function 100 minus P. Okay, so this is going to jump till here, and then it is going to follow this function, and then it is 0. Okay, there shouldn't be a jump though. P is equal to 30, you get a demand as 30 is equal to 90. 160 minus 90 is 70. No, there shouldn't be a jump. Okay, I have made a mistake in drawing. There shouldn't be a jump actually. Sorry. Okay. Let me draw this again. This is not what I drew is just a little bit wrong. Yeah, this is better. Okay, so basically this is the demand curve, market demand D. From this value is what? P is equal to 0. This is 160. Let me mark all the values. This is 100 and this is 30, right? No, 60. Okay, so now the market demand curve is this green line. Okay, it follows this green line up till P equal to 30, and after that it coincides with the D1. I'm purposely not drawing it on D1 because I want to show that they are both overlaying. And then after P equal to 100, it becomes 0. So that upper line, this line is also important. There are 3 parts to it. Okay. So now if you look at this diagram, just look at it carefully, right? In some parts, it is like almost as flat as the D2 curve, and in some flat parts, it is following the slope of the D1 curve, right? So that means the market demand function doesn't necessarily have to be a straight line at all. This is a kinged straight line actually, or a kinged line, not a king straight line. And that is usually how it's going to be. So if you, here we have taken a summation of only 2 separate demand functions. If you're taking a summation of multiple demand functions, you will get something much more complicated. So I will take a diagram and an example from this book, Pindyck and Rubenfeld. And in this, they have taken, if you want, you can refer to it. This is, I think, which chapter is this? Chapter 4, Individual and Market Demand in Pindyck and Rubenfeld. I'm just redrawing the example they have taken to kind of illustrate the point which you were asking about steepness and flatness of the curve. Okay, so let me mark the points. Just give me a few minutes to draw this. Okay, this is something like this. Okay, I'm not drawing it exactly because that is a tough call, but just for reference. Okay. So I'm drawing the individual demand curves here. There are 3 individuals or 3 sections, you can say A, B, and C, and I'm drawing their demand functions. This is DA. And then let's do this dark blue thing. This is DB. Oh, it's too thick. This is DB. Then there is another demand function, which is something like this, DC. Okay, this DB can be a little steeper. Okay, so now we'll draw the market demand function. In this case, the market demand function is going to be something like this, then like this. This is a very rough diagram, but you know, it kind of illustrates the point which we are discussing. So, does this diagram make sense to you? What are we trying to do? So basically what we're trying to do is that for each value of price, for example, P equal to 1, we are taking a summation of the quantities horizontally, meaning across each demand function. So this green line, you can just extend it a little bit here. Okay, so which means that D, capital D, is definitely going to be much farther out than DA, DB, DC, right? Because D is equal to this, say Q1 or QA is equal to 5, QB is equal to 10, QC is equal to say 18, Q is equal to what? QA plus QB plus QC, right? It's going to be something like 15 plus 18, 33. So this is going to be much further out, right? Similarly, for each value of P, the demand curve is definitely going to be much further to the right, isn't it? And then there will be some segments where, you know, demand for the particular good at that particular price, say for P is equal to 5 or P is equal to say 6, the demand is 0 for some of the buyers, right? For example, at P equal to 5, DA is equal to 0, right? Similarly, at P is equal to say 5.5, let's extend this till here. P equal to 5.5, DA and DB are 0, right? So there will be at least some part of the demand curve which is going to be matching in kind of like matching in the slope to one of the individual demand curves, which is steeper. So this part of the demand curve, let's use some other color. Okay. So this part of the demand curve is steep, right? But it still cannot be steeper than any one of the individual demand curves. And this part of the demand curve is flat. Are you understanding what I'm trying to say? For certain prices, there's like, say, suppose 10 buyers, okay? For say certain prices, all 10 buyers want to buy. For certain prices, only a few of them wants to buy. For certain prices, only one of them wants to buy, right? So for the prices for which all the buyers want to buy that good, the demand curve will be far, far more flat than any other individual demand curve. Make sense? Flat means what? The quantity is much, much higher than any of the individual quantities. And then for certain prices or certain price, there's going to be maybe only one buyer who wants to buy it, right? So for that particular price, the demand curve for the market will be the same as the individual who is willing to buy at that price. So it will be as steep as, at most as steep as that particular individual demand curve, which is this part, is same as this part. And this flat curve is flatter than any of the other curves. So I don't know if it is making sense to you, but basically when you take a horizontal summation, that is what it means. If you want, you can read this in Dyke and Rubenfeld or Field, I don't remember exactly, chapter 4. They've given a table and a summary and a diagram, the same diagram. They've not explained it that much, but if you draw it yourself, there is a table. Okay, there's a table over there for different market prices and individual demand for each prices. There's a table for this particular diagram itself. And if you look at that and you try to draw these diagrams yourself, because right now I'm explaining it's just jargon. If you draw it, you will understand what I mean by flat and what I mean by steep. Steep and flat is nothing but how Q is changing with P, right? So for this part of the demand curve, it is equal to nothing but, let's say here, D is equal to DC, right? In this part, So the slope will be the same as DC, and DC is a little steep. And in this part, this big part, D is equal to dA plus dB plus, DC. So it is going to be flatter than the most flat curve. Flat means what? Q is very high for the same price. Understood? So that's why your question is saying something like, at any price, the market demand curve is at most as steep as the steepest individual demand curve. It cannot be steeper than the steepest individual demand curve, at least as flat as the flattest individual demand curve, because it is going to be a summation of all the three. So it has to be at least as flat as the individual demand curve. And it is all obviously the sum, or ideally they should write the horizontal sum of all the individual demand curves. Make sense?
Madam, over here, regarding this flatness thing, isn't flatness supposed to be inverse of slope?
What?
Isn't flatness supposed to be inverse of slope? If steepness measures the slope, flatness isn't it supposed
No, neither is measuring the slope here. You are just using these as adjectives as steep and flat. Okay, if it is less than 45, you can call it flat. If it is more than 45, you can call it as steep.
Okay,
Neither
okay.
is inverse of slope. They are both talking about the slope. Flat just means it is, I mean, objectively it means flat is less than 45 degrees, slope steep you can say is more than 45 degree. But what we are saying is we are saying it in relative terms. We're not talking about objectively whether it is 45 degrees or more or what. We are saying if any one curve, whichever curve out of all these individual demand curves is the flattest, the market demand curve is going to be flatter than that one, or at least as flat as that individual demand curve. Here you have to understand flatness as understanding the quantity. You have to look at the quantity. What is the value of Q for dA? Look at this value. Flatness is what? Q upon P. How is Q changing with P? So for P is equal to 1, what is the value of dA? It is 5, right? For dB, 10. For DC, 18, 17. So D is obviously going to be a summation of all these values, right? So it's going to be much more. So it's going to be much flatter than any of these curves. Are you understanding? You have to look at it numerically, not trigonometry wise.
Okay, okay, okay.
Yeah, you have to draw these diagrams yourself, otherwise you will not understand it. We are talking about how is Q varying with P. Flatness means Q is very high with respect to P. Steepness means Q is less with respect to P.
Flatness means high. But if we look at our case, the example that we have taken just now,
Yeah. This diagram or the previous one?
the previous one where we had Q1, Q2, and Q.
Yeah.
Over here, the demand curve need not always be the sum of individual curves, madam. At times,
No, it is the sum of is the horizontal sum of individual curves. Sum means you add Q1 plus Q2. We are talking about horizontal sum. Horizontal sum means if this value is 0, you just add 0 here. Okay, if Q is equal to Q1 plus Q2, it's not just Q1 plus Q2. If Q1 equal to 0, then Q is nothing but 0 plus Q2. That is what horizontal sum means.
okay, madam. Okay.
Which is what we are doing. We're just finding out at what value Q1 is becoming 0 or Q2 is becoming 0.
Okay.
You understanding? At P equal to 30, Q2 is becoming 0. We are still taking a sum of Q1 and Q2. It is just that Q2 is 0. That's all. Did you get it?
Yes, madam.
Yes. So
And
even in this diagram, if you see the market demand curve, which is green, it is flatter than the blue curve and it is as steep as the pink curve. Right? Which means the market demand curve is always going to be at least as flat as one of the individual demand curves and at most as steep as the one of the individual demand curves. In case there are only two, so that is all you can compare with.
regarding this, at least as flat as the flattest individual curve, does it mean that the Q that we are taking would have the least Q as a part of this thing?
Sorry, what?
Which means that the resultant Q will have the least possible quotient of Q
No, it
given.
doesn't mean any least anything. It just means that you are taking a sum of this value and this value. So it's going to be further out, right? That's what it means. You calculate the slope of the blue curve, you calculate the slope of the green curve, and you compare. Okay?
Okay, the slope of the blue curve would be t minus 2p, which
No,
would
you
be
do it as an exercise. We still have a class tomorrow. I want you to draw it. I don't want you to do it verbally. You're not understanding it because you're not drawing it. Take pen, take paper, draw it.
no, no. I'm drawing actually.
Yes, and then calculate the slope of each curves. For this diagram also, you look at the values given for each dA, dB, DC. It's a lot of writing. That's why I'm not writing here. Look at this book, Pindike and Rubinfield, chapter 4, and then see how the values are changing and calculate the slope of each of these curves. Then compare with the final demand curve.
Madam, what's spelling of Pindike PENDYKE?
Pindyck.
Okay, madam. I will look it up.
Yes, Pindike and Rubinfield. Robert Pindike and Daniel Rubinfield. This is the ninth edition which I am referring to, but I think this diagram is going to be there in other editions also. Okay, so I will move to the next question. This is also a very simple question. I want you to please try and solve it, and then I will solve it. Okay, so let's do this question. It's a pretty simple, straightforward question. Um, let me open the question. So this is question 2. You're given the market demand function or inverse market demand function as 1000 minus 2 QD, and you're given the inverse market supply function as 100 plus QS. P and Q are the price and quantity of a bag of rice. You're asked what is the equilibrium quantity and price. So for equilibrium quantity and price, we just equate the, we can equate it as in the inverse form also. So that will just make our lives easier. Instead of QD and QS, we just put Q, 100 plus Q. This is 900 is equal to 3Q. Q is equal to 300. Okay, and price from there comes to 300 plus 100 is equal to 400. So this is the first part of the question, which is the equilibrium quantity and price. If you want, you can put this as Q star and P star. Now you have a price floor of 500. Price floor means that is the lowest price any firm can sell at. They cannot price it at lower than that. That is the lowest price which is achievable. Floor means low, right? It's below you. Ceiling is above your head. So, I mean, that's how I remember it. Ceiling is above your head. So, that is the maximum you can go to. Floor is below your feet. So, that is the lowest you can go. You cannot go below the floor, right? So, that is how, that's the way to remember this. Price floor is 500. So in this case, what is going to happen? Is there going to be an excess? Is there going to be a shortage? That's what they're asking. So for price floor, we will do what? We will calculate QD and QS separately, and we will see if there is an excess or if there is a shortage. So let's first calculate QD, which is PF is equal to 1000 minus 2 QD. This is 500 is equal to 1000 minus 2 QD. This is 2 QD is equal to 500. QD is equal to 250. Now we will calculate QS, which is given by P equal to 100 plus QS. So PF is equal to 100 plus QS, right? Okay, QS. So QS is equal to PF is 500 minus 100 is equal to 400. So we can see easily that QS is greater than QD. Therefore, there is excess supply. And that makes sense because at a very high price, a lot of buyers will be wanting to supply that quantity, whereas much fewer people, much fewer buyers will be wanting to buy that good, right? So there will be excess supply. Firstly, suppliers have increased. Secondly, buyers have reduced. So there is going to be an excess supply, and excess quantity is equal to 400 minus 250 is equal to 150. Is there anything else in the question? Right. So what is the excess or shortage? This is the excess or shortage. Okay, let's go to the next question. The next question is the market demand for textbooks, that means paper books, is given by Q is equal to 100 by P plus 5PD square, where Q is number of books, P is market price of textbooks, and PD is the market price of digital books, e-books. Okay. Firstly, you're asked what is the price elasticity of demand of books at the value of QP equal to 1000, 400. Okay, so firstly, we are asked price elasticity of demand. Let me write down the function. You're given the function, demand function, as 100 by P plus 5PD square. Okay. Now, you're asked price elasticity epsilon is what we have to calculate. So epsilon is equal to what? X del Q by del P on Q by P, right? That's the function, that's how we define price elasticity of demand with respect to its own price. By when we say price elasticity of demand, it automatically means with respect to the price of that particular good itself. Okay. Now this we can easily calculate. We differentiate this function 100 by p plus 5p d square. We are taking partial derivative with respect to p. So this becomes minus 100 by p square upon q by p. For plus 5 pd square is 0, right? That when you take partial derivative with respect to p. Let's just check if I'm getting the correct answer. Yeah. So what are we going to do? 1p we can cancel from here, minus 100 by p square, and q by p, 1p we cancel here. So this just becomes minus 100 by q into p. And we are given, what is the value given? Q and p is given as 1000, 400. Therefore, at this price, you just plug in the values and you calculate it. Minus 100 upon minus 1 upon 4000. So this is the price elasticity of demand. The next part is asking us, what is the cross price elasticity of demand of textbooks with respect to digital books at q comma pd equal to 1000 comma 50. So first let's calculate the expression for cross price elasticity. Let's call this as epsilon d, and we do this similar thing. Cross price elasticity means del q by del pd, right, upon q by pd, because we are taking it with respect to digital books, right? That's what cross price elasticity of demand means. So first let's calculate this value. 5 PD, so 100 by P becomes 0 when you take partial derivative with respect to PD. 5 PD square becomes 10 PD upon Q upon PD. So this becomes 10 PD square upon Q. And we are given Q comma PD equal to 1000 comma 50, I think. Yeah, 1000 comma 50. Therefore, epsilon d, let's say, 10 into 50 square upon 1000. This is 2500 upon 100. It's equal to 25. Check if I have the correct answer. Yes. So now the next part is simple. It is asking you, are digital books substitutes, complements, or neither for textbooks? So what do we see? Cross price elasticity of demand is positive, which means that with an increase in price of digital books, quantity demanded for textbooks is increasing. That's what elasticity tells you, right? With some change in price, how is quantity getting affected? So here, because it is cross price elasticity, we are talking about some change in price of digital books, the alternate good which is there in the demand function. And here you see, for example, in the price elasticity of demand, it is negative, minus 1 upon 4000, meaning some change in price causes a very small change in quantity demanded of books, but there is a change and it's a negative change, right? Increase in prices causing a change in demand of books, or rather reducing a change in demand of books. For digital books, an increase in the price of digital books is causing a pretty significant increase in the demand of textbooks. So they are substitutes, right? Epsilon D is greater than 0. Therefore, not they, let me write full thing. Digital books I just written it in short that because epsilon D is greater than 0, but you understand what I'm trying to say, right? We're talking about how price changes are affecting the quantity demanded for the good. Okay, so this answers this question. Let's go to the next question. Market demand for a pharmaceutical drug is given by QD equal to 1000. Okay. The market supply of the drug is given by P equal to 400 plus QS. What is the equilibrium Q star P star of the drug? This is actually a pretty simple question. There's not that much to calculate. But if you see, basically you see that the demand is completely inelastic, right? The demand is fixed at 1000 irrespective of what the price is. So the price is just given by Q 400 plus QS in equilibrium QS equal to QD. So P is equal to 400 plus 1000, which is 1400. So that is your first answer. Now, if the government decides to tax a pharmaceutical company at a rate of tau equal to 50, what is the new equilibrium quantity of the drug being traded and at what price? Right now, in this, remember the demand is inelastic, and in the case when the demand is inelastic, what usually happens? We can draw it and solve it, but usually the in the whole setup of the market between buyer and seller, whoever is more inelastic ends up bearing the burden of the tax more. And if either of them is perfectly inelastic, either the supplier or the buyer, whoever is perfectly inelastic ends up bearing the entire burden of the tax. So this is what we studied, I think, in week 3 or 2 or something, right? So that's what's happening here. We're talking about tau equal to 50. I don't want to solve this verbally like this. Let me write this down. You are given QD into 2000. P is 400 plus QS. Q star P star I already calculated. Okay, this is part 1. Part 2 is tau is equal to 50 and you are asked the new equilibrium quantity and new equilibrium price, right? Now tau equal to 50 means, well, you can see that one thing which does not change, which is the quantity, right? Quantity is not going to change because demand is inelastic. QD prime, let's say, is equal to QD, is still equal to the same, it's 1000, right? And in equilibrium, QS is still equal to QD is equal to 1000, right? Now, the price which the consumer is going to pay, price for consumer is going to be P star, which was the initial equilibrium price, plus tau, right? Because in this case, what is happening? The entire burden is going to the consumer. Let me draw this quickly. Okay. So QD diagram is telling you that QD is a vertical line like this. Okay, this is QD. Okay, and you have initially What is the value at Q equal to 0? Yeah, P is starting from this point. This is 400, and then it is upward sloping. It is intersecting. This is, oh, sorry. It's QS, all right? So it is intersecting here at P is equal to 1400 and Q is the same, it's 1000. This is how it is initially, right? Now, after the tax application, tax is being applied on the pharmaceutical company, which is on the seller. So we will shift the seller's supply curve. This is what, 50. So let's say this is 50, right? So this is the price at this point, PC. This is the price the consumer is going to pay. So this is 450. I hope I'm making sense. So basically PC you can see is nothing but P star plus tau. I'm not solving the whole thing, but you can see that this is P star plus tau. 1400 plus 50 is equal to 1450. Now the question is asking us what exactly? Question is asking us what is the producers and consumers surplus after the tax? What is deadweight loss? How much tax revenue is generated by the government? So in this case, we know the producer surplus and consumer surplus is like not like the conventional way. So you see, in this case, the consumer surplus is always going to be infinite. This is the whole thing, right? Now in this, it is going up till infinity. So in this, if you see the new changed value also, it is still going up till infinity. So it is still going to be infinite. And producer surplus is going to remain the same because the price which the producer is getting is still the same. So let me shade this with this color. This 1400, right? This is the price the producer is getting. This is the producer's surplus. You can calculate the values from the diagram. I mean, I'm leaving this as an exercise for you. I think I've explained it fairly well. If any of this is not making sense, you can tell me. But we discussed this at great length earlier, so I'm not explaining it fully. But I think this much explanation is sufficient here. It's not a complicated problem. Deadweight loss will be 0 because there is no deadweight loss when demand or supply is inelastic. Okay?
Madam, over here I'm having some problem with the consumer surplus and producer surplus thing.
Producer surplus is the area between the supply curve and the price line, the price or equilibrium value, and the consumer surplus is the area between the demand curve and again the price line. Now in this, actually, oh, I think I've drawn it wrong. Sorry, you're right. In this case, let me redo this. So this whole area initially was the consumer surplus, and now after changing, after the tax, this whole area is the consumer surplus. But since the whole thing is still infinity, the consumer surplus is not changing because there's like a small loss, right? Only tax revenue value which the government is generating is nothing but QD into tau, 1000 into 50, you can say 50,000. That is the only loss in consumer surplus. But infinity minus some value is still infinity. So there is no change in consumer surplus and there is no change in producer surplus. If you want, I can highlight the new producer surplus also, but it just makes the diagram very messy. So this is the new producer surplus. Okay.
The pink one being the old producer surplus, and the
Yes.
light blue one being the light blue or the grayish one that we're
Yeah.
talking. That being the new producer surplus.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. So, okay, let's go to the next question. I don't know how many we will be able to cover today, but there are quite a few questions. Okay, so now we are given a question where we are given the utility function, and X is the quantity of cake and Y is the quantity of ice cream. Firstly, you're asked what is the MRS value for this particular consumer. Then you are given PX and PY, and you're asked, what is the optimal consumption budget bundle for this budget. And then you're asked that there is an increase in the price of ice cream such that new PY is equal to 400, and you're asked the Marshallian and demand and Hicksian demand vectors meaning values after the price increase. So we discussed this at great length, and I'll let you attempt this question first, then I will discuss it. Okay, so let's solve this question. Did you attempt it?
I tried, but I could not make much sense of second and third parts.
Okay, so let's solve this question. We are given that u is equal to 2x plus y whole square. First part just asks us to calculate the MRS. MRS is nothing but ux upon uy, which is nothing but del u by del x, del u by del y. So I'm just calculating it in one place only. Del u by del x is nothing but 2 into 2x plus y. That we're just taking partial derivative with respect to x. And del u by del y is nothing but 2x plus y. Taking partial derivative, coefficient is 1, so this is 2x plus y. So this is equal to 2. So MRS is pretty straightforward. It's equal to 2. Second part is asking us, open question, if we are given Px is 300, Py is 150, and budget is 1200, you're asked the optimal consumption bundle. Now, you can see this is a case of perfect substitutes, right? Why? Because it is existing in the form of u is ax plus by. Some function of ax plus by is nothing but perfect substitutes. So if we are given here Px is greater than Py, therefore x will not be consumed at all, right? We are given Px is 300, Py is 150. So there won't be any consumption of x at all because this is a case of perfect substitutes. So from here the equation becomes fairly simple now. B is equal to x Px plus y Py. Now x is equal to 0, so this just becomes y Py. This is 1200. Py is what? 150. 150 by 1200 by. You can calculate this, whatever this comes out to be. 8. Okay, y is equal to 8. Therefore, consumption bundle is x star. Y star is 0, comma 8. Okay, this is the second part. Now the third part is saying that there is an increase in price of ice cream such that new Py, let's call this Py prime, is 400. Now you're asked the Marshallian and Hicksian demand vectors, meaning Marshallian and Hicksian demand values. Okay, so now Marshallian just means whatever we are normally doing. Marshallian means what are you holding as constant? What do we hold? What do we take as constant in Marshallian demand? Budget, right? Budget is taken as constant in Marshallian demand, which means we are just doing the same thing which we did before, but just for the new value of Py. Now, in this case, you see Px is what? Px is the same. Px is 300. Py is now 400. Therefore, now you have Py prime is greater than Px. Therefore, y is equal to 0. Again, it's perfect substitute. So, if price of y is higher than price of x, y will not be consumed at all. Therefore, y will be 0. Now, we just simply plug in the values of b is equal to x Px. Well, 1200 is equal to, what is the value of Px? 300, right? 300x. Therefore, x is equal to 4. This is the new value of x. This is the Marshallian, or you can say xn. This is Marshallian demand, which we can write now as xm star ym star is equal to 4 comma 0. Next, you're asked Hicksian demand. Hicksian demand means what? What are we holding constant in Hicksian demand? Utility, right? Hicksian demand means utility is constant. So what will we do? We will calculate the utility here first, initially, before change of prices. Before change of prices, I'm not written the utility function. Yeah, 2x plus y whole square. So let's take u bar as constant utility is equal to 2x plus y whole square. What was the value of x and y before? 0 comma 8. 0 plus 8 whole square is 64. This is u bar. This is initial utility. Now in the new setup, after change of prices, what are we going to do? We are going to calculate the new value of x given utility is constant, not budget. When we calculated Marshallian demand, we took budget as the same. Now we are not going to take the budget as the same. We are going to take utility as constant. This fact that this py is greater than px, so y is equal to 0 is still going to hold, because that is just the case, that is just what happens in perfect substitutes. But the value of x is going to be different, right? So after change of prices, y sorry, py prime is greater than px, therefore y is equal to 0. So to calculate x, we take 2x plus y whole square. Again, here we know u bar. This is u bar we just calculated. 64 is equal to 2x, you can say xh whole square. This y we already know is 0. So 64 is equal to 4 times xh squared is equal to 16 xh is equal, sorry, xh square is equal to 16, xh is equal to 4. So in this particular case, we are getting both Hicksian and Marshallian demands as same. It doesn't always happen like that, but in this particular example, they're both coming out to be the same. This is 4 and this is also 4. So we can just write this as xh star four comma 0. Okay, let me go back to the question. So this was our question. You are given the utility function, we calculated the MRS, we calculated the optimal consumption bundle, and then for the new price of ice cream, Py equal to 400, we then calculated the Marshallian and Hicksian demand. Okay, let's go to the next question. You are given quasi utility function for some guy called Siggy. This is a question from Perloff, which is equal to 4. Okay, the screen is not updated. Yeah, 4 root q1 plus q2. Now we are just calling the consumption values as q1 and q2 instead of x1, x2, and x and y and all that. Okay, his budget is y equal to 10. Originally, the prices are P1 equal to P2 equal to 1. However, the price for the first good, P1, increases to 2. Now you're asked substitution, income, and total effect. So I'll give you, we don't have a lot of time left, so let's just give it like a few, maybe 1 minute for you to think how you're going to approach the problem, and then I'll solve it. Okay, so how will we tackle this question? We did a few questions of this type in the previous classes. So firstly, initially, we are given P1 equal to P2 equal to 1. You're given the budget, you're given the utility function. So you can, of course, calculate the initial optimal bundle. That is straightforward. What will we do? You can either use a Lagrangian and first order conditions, or like the simpler method which we have used most often. We take mu1 by mu2 equal to p1 by p2. Okay, so from that condition you can calculate the values of q1 and q2. That is your initial consumption bundle. Then what are we going to do? We know the new price for p1, which is equal to 2. We will do the same thing to calculate the new optimal bundle using the same method, mu1 by mu2 equal to p1 prime by p2, right? You get the new optimal bundle. What is total effect? Total effect is new q1 prime, let's call it, minus original q1. q1 prime minus q1 is total effect. Then we know the total effect from here. What we need to calculate now is substitution and income effects, right? Substitution and income effects come from where? Now, what we just did in the previous question, we just calculated Marshallian Hicksian demand, right? Now, we'll do the same thing. We've already calculated Marshallian demand, which is nothing but the new value of Q1, which we got. We're going to calculate Hicksian demand for quantity, for the good one, which means we will take utility constant. Initial utility we calculated just like we calculated in the previous question. We take u bar or u naught, whatever you want to call it. And for that value of u naught, you calculate the new value of q1 given the all the other values. Okay. Now this, let's call this q1 double prime. Now you take the difference between q1 and q1 double prime, and that gives you the substitution effect. Total effect is equal to substitution plus income effect. So obviously now you have total effect and substitution effect, you can calculate the income effect. So I'm not solving this question in the class, but when I update the class notes, I will solve it in that class notes. I think it's a good question for you to try it out. Just try solving this question once. I will share the class notes. In that I will solve all the questions in the slides, which I have not solved in the class. But please try it out. Okay, that's why I'm not solving it in the class. Just make a note of the fact that in this question, Q1 and Q2 are not perfect substitutes. This is a quasi-linear utility function. If this were 4Q1 plus Q2, this would become perfect substitutes, right? Like how we did in the previous question. This was an f of ax plus, oh, slide is not updating. Yeah. In this function, 2x plus y whole square, we can express utility in the form of functional form of ax plus by, right? But this is not ax plus by because q1 has a square root sign. They are not having, they're not a linear composition. So don't do this like we did for perfect substitutes, where we take prices and we equate the quantities, or I mean, we took one quantity as 0. That will not be applicable for here. But the normal method we use, mu1 by mu2 equal to p1 by p2, that is universal. That is not constrained to any particular functional form. So that is how you will solve this problem. Okay, let's go to the next question. We are given a firm which produces safety pins and its production function is given by 5x plus z or z to the power of alpha. X is hours of labor and z is quantity of steel. So you're asked, under what conditions on the parameter alpha does the firm exhibit constant returns to scale? Now here basically what are we asking? We are asking, if you remember the condition for constant returns to scale, increasing returns to scale, decreasing returns to scale, then this will not be too difficult. What is the condition? Let me write it here only actually. So for constant returns to scale, you can say f of Tx1, Tx2 is equal to T times f of x1, x2. This is the condition for constant returns to scale. In this question, what will we do? We will just write the expression for, instead of x and z, you take tx and tz, and you equate it to t times of this whole expression which we have for q. You equate both and you see what value alpha comes out to be, and that is the condition on alpha. MRTS, I'm sure you can calculate. This is what MRTS is nothing but partial derivative with respect to x of q, and del q by del x upon del q by del z. That's MRTS. Okay, so this is also a pretty simple question. We actually did this just 2 weeks ago, so I'm not solving it in the class. I have already done many questions like this. All the solutions will be there in the class notes I upload. I'm just running through this because we don't have that much time left. We spent a lot of time on the first question, actually, that's why we don't have that much time left. But anyway, I'm going over these. The optimal, what is it asking? Cost minimizing values of x and z we can calculate, same as what we did before. You are given the prices, you are given the value of alpha, you're asked to solve for cost minimizing values of x and z. We just take MRTS and prices, and from there we get the cost minimizing values. The last question is, I think, similar to the question which I just solved for week 11. You are given the cost function, which is 200 plus 2q squared. The q is the output, c is the total cost. Price is given to you, how many watches do you produce? So this is just simple cost minimization thing. What will be the profit? And you're asked at what minimum price will the firm produce a positive output? What will we do this over here? We calculate marginal cost is what? 4q. Average variable cost is 2q. Therefore, for q greater than or equal to 0, average variable cost is positive, is like, increasing. And these are both, this is exactly the same as the question I discussed in class today. This is one and this is the other. So this, which is which? This is marginal cost, this is average variable cost, right? So for all values of q greater than 0, the firm will produce a positive output. This is pretty simple question compared with the questions we have done. And you can calculate how many watches by taking the simple, you can take partial derivative or you can do it some other way. Okay, so I had to rush through the last 2 or 3 questions, firstly because I'm not actually feeling too well, and secondly because these questions I have discussed many times in the last 2 classes alone. But I will upload all the solutions in the class notes, which I usually upload. And if you still have some doubts, tomorrow we still have another class, week 12. If you still have some doubts from today's discussion, I will address it tomorrow. Okay, so I think I will end it here unless anybody has any questions. No?
No, madam.
Okay, thank you. So tomorrow we still have the class. It's a last class, so if necessary, I can extend it by a few minutes also. If you have any questions left which have not been addressed, you can bring them tomorrow. Okay. All right. So I'll end the class here then.
There was one tabular form question, madam, which we were talking about. I forgot which assignment it's from.
Assignment week 8, question 5 and 6. Yeah, I'm still in disagreement with the TAs on that question. That's why I didn't bring it up. And they are saying that question is correct, and I think that question is wrong. And I'm not able to get hold of the instructor to resolve it. So that's why I've not brought it up in the class, because I personally think the reasoning is wrong. I mean, I know how they got the answer, but the reasoning is not making sense to me. But if it helps, don't worry about it. They will not give you a question like that in your exam, if that is any help. Okay, all right. Thank you. I'll see you tomorrow. I'll end the class here.